inconsistent beliefs or beliefs that kind of contradict each other can sometimes be hard for you to process. It's similar to saying, okay, well, I know that, say, smoking is bad for me, but you don't necessarily want to stop doing it. So then you rationalize that it's okay, but then you know it's not. This causes dissonance. So let's talk about that today so you can understand cognitive dissonance and listen, how to get through it, honestly. Check it out. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Positivity Experience. It is your girl, Lori, and we're already through 1 month down, 11 more to go. So we have plenty of time this year to make it better for ourselves than it was last year. And it's good to understand what your dissonance is. And this is why you gotta kind of stop defending yourself. Like, I'm a big, confidence is very, very quiet, and insecurity is very, very loud. And a lot of times when people are barking their sort of view, and I mean really barking it, they don't want to face questions and challenges, which will cause dissonance. Now, there is going to be a worksheet, as always, over on Patreon. Okay, so the Patreon is going to give you some examples and real life actions, and it's going to have you do some self-reflection, and it is in the Patreon. So you do not need it to listen to this podcast, but if you're like, okay, this sounds great, but where do I start? That might be a great spot to start. And you can find that at patreon.com/the positivity experience. But let's talk about it here. So I want you to understand, I want to make it kind of easier for you to kind of get it to where you at least see what it is. So let's say it's smoking, right? You get all of these warnings, smoking is bad. It causes all of these issues. And so you know that that's there, but yet you really enjoy it, or you're like, I don't know, maybe it's all hype. Like now you start negotiating this because it's something that you want. So when there is actual facts, right? And there are facts in that, right? When there's facts that says, okay, listen, this is not great for you. Like, this really isn't good. So, do it, but just know that these are the risks. When you have to sometimes look at it in perspective, on each perspective, that can cause dissonance where you're just confused is really a better word. But this is where you have to understand a lot of times you're going to buck back on that. This is big with conflict, right? Like, let's say, here's another example of that. Let's say you took action based on some rules that say, hey, do this. It's going to be the best thing for you ever. Okay. So you do this. Well, you know what? A year or two later, something comes out and it's like, hey, you know what? Remember when we told you X, Y, Z? Yeah, it's fine. But listen, this is really where you want to focus now, right? Because that's what happens. People grow, people learn. But sometimes that's hard for you to kind of get in your head. So then you try to negotiate why you can't do it. And then you blame the fact that there's a different alternative. So think of dissonance that when there's an alternative that comes into play, it can challenge your inner core beliefs. Now, you'll see a lot of this in religion. You'll see a lot of it in politics. You'll see a lot of it in decision making. Like there's a lot that comes into play. So if you have your mind on something, you're like, it is this. This is how I'm going to see it. This is how I only want to see it. Okay. And then someone comes to you and let's say it's full on proof. It's science, it's facts, right? That's going to challenge this part of your brain and you're not going to like it. So that can cause not just confusion, that can cause a lot of very defensiveness too, because you're like, well, this is what I would believe the whole time. Yeah, but there's a bigger world out there. Okay, so essentially think of fixed mindset versus growth mindset a little bit here. So growth mindset says, okay, I'm willing to see other perspectives without worrying about it challenging what it is that I feel. All right. So like inconsistent beliefs, and two or more of those can contradict each other. So if you have a belief and if I have a belief, and you hear only your side, and then when I talk to and say like, not side, but hey, this is my view, and you immediately go into it's wrong, it's not even just so much that you believe that it's wrong, it's that it is way more comfortable for you to believe it is wrong, because then it's going to make you second guess things, which is how we work in life. Like that's how we grow. We see perspectives from different people. We embrace the unknown. We embrace the different. But when you are resistant to that, it is going to cause a cognitive dissonance where you just are like, oh God, what do I do with this? And then you feel stressed. And I don't know if you've ever seen people like this, but it does happen. Let's say, I don't know, someone says something and they're hell-bent determined that it is absolutely correct. Okay, now, if it's an experience that they went through, it's correct to them. Doesn't mean it's correct to everybody. But let's say they're like, it is right. I never did this. And now there's proof, like there is like visual proof and everything, and there's no getting around it. Sometimes instead of people going, oh my God, well, that's not even how I remembered it. Okay, I guess that's me, right? Sometimes that will cause this little level of like, oh my God, wait a minute, what do I do with that? And you go into a little bit of a panic state. And then that's like, well, that's not how I meant it. And then you're like, okay, but like an hour ago, you were telling me it wasn't you at all. And now you're saying it's how you know. And so then that throws you off because you're like, okay, you're being fake. And sometimes they are, and sometimes they just literally don't even understand it. Like they're like, okay, well, this is what I thought. And again, ego will come into play with dissonance, right? Ego says, hey, this is my belief system. What's yours? I mean, you don't have to walk around surveying the world. But if you want to have an open mind and be able to receive it, so you're not stuck in that dissonance, it's a very, very imprisoning place and very confusing place. And you want to be able to see it without having to worry about, does this challenge me? A lot of times your concern is that, well, that's not what I believe. Okay, then don't. Like, calm down. It's all good. You know, and then that's when you have the contradictory actions where your mind tries to align your behaviors and attitudes with somewhat of the facts, right? So like, let's say it's, like I said, the smoking situation. Okay. You can say, okay, well, but I mean, I'm smoking this one and this is better than that one. Now you start negotiating because the reality is you don't want to stop. But then you don't want to get sick either. So it's like there's this combination of things that really causes this confusion. And yes, it is psychological. And yes, it can be worked on. But you got to be willing to do it. Now, there could be a social influence that comes into play. This is why social media can be such a bad thing in many places, where external pressures to adopt a specific belief, okay, that's contradicting what it is that you want, but you're trying to fit in from a social perspective. You'll see this at work a lot. Let's say you have certain core values with something at work. I don't know. Let's say it's something to do with chemicals and foods. Okay. You work for a company and it's something to do with chemical and foods. Now they're not putting like necessarily quote unquote poison in it, but it's stuff that you're like, oh my God, I don't believe this. Like, I really don't believe in this. So now you're faced with the decision, are your core values that important in this specific setting? Or can you overlook them to do whatever job that you are hired to do? Now, here's the thing. If in fact you're like, yeah, I just can't do that. Like that's really against my thing. Well, don't try to make the company not do it. That's where you have to get into the space and you have to say, ooh, okay, wow, this place is not for me. Maybe this is not what I want in the first place. But that's why you always want to ask, I'm talking about work specifically. That's why you want to ask specifically when you're getting a job on the questions, like whatever they are. Know your core values. Do you need, and not even that, know what your desires are. I need a flexible place. I need to be able to do remote work. Well, don't just assume that you're going to do remote work. You better ask if that's a possibility, because then what happens is you're like, but this is what I wanted. And now I feel like I have to do this because it's my job, but it's like, it's really cutting into my time. That's going to cause a lot of dissonance. Or like I said, even a society thing. Or if, you go on TikTok or you go on Instagram, you go on YouTube, something like that. And it's like, boom, boom, boom. This is what you're supposed to do. And you're like, okay, well, I mean, I don't want to. Like, that's not really what I believe in. And then you're like, but I don't really want to be left out. Well, that's where self-esteem is going to come into play. And you got to have those strong core values. It's like decision making. Okay. Making a choice, a positive choice, for yourself, but that has negative aspects, you're going to have consequences there. Okay, you're going to have consequences. You could make a positive action that goes against somebody else's belief system, and they could try to punish you or get you in trouble because you didn't align with their beliefs. In turn, you start questioning yourself. Okay, you're like, well, I mean, that's not what I mean, I guess I could see it. Like, don't do that, because it's going to cause you to constantly go forward and backwards in thought. And that can be problematic. Now, many of the reasons that we kind of go against things and go into the comfort zone. Think of the comfort zone, fear of change. See, change is the best thing on the planet. The uncertain and unknown is where everything that is going to benefit you lives. Not in the comfort zone, not in the yesterday, not in the what you're familiar with. How you actually grow is in this comfort zone. Out of this comfort zone. You got to have the discomfort to get out of this comfort zone. All right? Because the comfort zone itself could be very, very isolating, and your need of quote unquote feeling safe in your beliefs will keep you in a space that while you would be okay, you're not going to grow. Okay. And then you're going to only have, if anybody, certain people around you. And we can't grow that way. We have to grow in diversity. We have to grow in actions. And you got to be willing to put the ego down and need to know and be the smartest person in the room. Because if not, it will challenge you. And then your confusion in turn will become very combative, very defensive. Because we need inconsistencies in our life. We need them. Because even though from a human standpoint, human brain says, okay, I want to know if I do this, then this happens and this happens. That's just a natural survival part of the brain. That is not a natural way of life. That is not a natural way of life. So if you are resisting change because of a belief system, but yet you want to feel better and you want to do better, but you're resisting the change, you're in dissonance. Okay. So that's why you got to go real deep with the question and says, well, why am I afraid of change? I can tell you why you're afraid of change. It's not, I'll say it's not that you're afraid of change. You are. You're afraid of letting go of control. Let's keep that very real. Very real. The fear of change is the fear of not having control and knowing what is going to happen. And until you can have a high tolerance of uncertainty, and you're living in a low tolerance of uncertainty, you will always have that internal conflict. All right. So when you're embracing the unknown, it can also go into the perfectionism that's not real, but you may have that. It's okay if things don't work out. They actually work out. That's just how it works. Even if they don't work out, they work out. And they work out immensely, because if they're showing you what doesn't work, that may challenge part of this belief system. And you're like, oh, I thought it was supposed to work. Well, why didn't it work? I did that because I thought it was going to work, and now it didn't. And oh my God, I don't know what to do with myself. When you get into that flusteredness, you're dealing with dissonance. But all of this is going to go into ego, core value, self-confidence, willingness to receive other people's views, willingness to put the ego beside you. Okay. Now there's something called post-decision issues, right? So what's a post-decision issue? I kind of glossed over that a little bit, but it's like when you discover something that was a better option. So this is those questions that you ask yourself, am I making the right decision? Like, is this action going to be the right one? Stop asking yourself those questions. The right one is going to be whichever one you decide. And that's a fact. It will either work out or it won't work out. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it always works out, because then you learn what doesn't work. You can't keep sitting there and going, I should have done that. Why didn't I make that decision? That's like going back yesterday and playing the lottery numbers that you now know are the lottery numbers that you got today, but playing them yesterday when they came out. Like, those are things that go into ego. And so ego plays a huge, huge part of this dissonance situation. It really does. Okay. And so what can you do about it? Well, like I said, I have that big worksheet that I'm not even going to go through here because it's kind of a big worksheet over on Patreon, but there are a few things. I want you to ask yourself right now, what do you believe? Okay, no matter where you are, you're driving, doing the dishes, I don't care what you're doing, working out. What do you believe? Now, I'd prefer you be able to write stuff like this down because I don't want you doing it in your head. So if you're listening to this and you're outside somewhere, that's fine. You just kind of do it in your head right now. But when you get home, I want you to really go into it. And that could be spiritually. It could be religiously. It could be about relationships. It could be what your values are, what your core values are. And in those core values, now you have to say, are my actions aligning with my values? Another area to look, excuse me, another area to look. Are my actions aligning with my growth? Okay, are my actions aligning with it? So let's say, let me give you an example of that. You've decided, I don't know, you want to get in bikini shape. You want this to be your hot girl summer era, right? Or hot guy summer era, whatever. And it's March, okay? And you're still trying to come up with a plan. Yeah, that plan should have already been put in play. But you're trying so hard to get there fast that you're getting counterintuitive and counteraction because you're trying to control it, but you want it to be a certain way, but you're not sure of the actions, but you're not taking the actions because you're not studying to see what they are. And then you have in your mind one way to do it. But you know what? There's a million ways to get to the number 5. Okay. You're not getting to 5 just one direction. And every day, almost every month, every year, there's a new study about what foods are best, what drinks are best, what not to do, what to do, how much water to drink. Wait, not that. Ooh, have bread. It's good. Nope, don't have bread. Yep, have bread again. So there's a lot that comes up that people are learning. You know, people are flawed humans, but every day they're learning something. That's why scientists exist and laboratories exist. And what you got to get clear in is it's okay that you made a decision here, but now 6 months later, we found out that this is the better way of doing it. There's no reason to beat yourself up behind it. No reason to live in a dissonance type space where you're now going into regret. You're sitting into a regret space, and that regret space is never going to serve your best and highest good. So the next time you catch yourself saying, "Oh God, I feel pulled. I feel like confused," and things like that. Ask yourself, am I being open-minded? Am I being open-minded to see things outside of outside of my lens so I can look in somebody else's lens, through somebody else's lens? Because yeah, it can be scary when there's change and you've lived in what we call, and by the way, honestly, the comfort zones are fake. I mean, they're there. You feel comfortable, sure. But at any given time, that comfort zone can be disrupted, right? That comfort zone can be totally disrupted. And so those are the things that you have to kind of keep in mind, because as you're going through this process of journey, your health journey, your wellness journey, your self-discovery journey, all of those things, you will be challenged multiple times with conflicting information. And this is why you make your own decisions, but you gotta do the research. This does not mean hop on Google. This means real research. And it's really understandable when you get into it, because then it's for you to make the decision, right? Now, some things are made for us just as humans, but like this way you can say, okay, I'm going to do blank. I'm going to do paddleboarding. I know I'm going to do paddleboarding because it's really good for my back, or whatever, just go with it, because it doesn't hurt your back depending on how you do it, but like it's good for my legs. It's good for that. It's exactly what I need. Well, how do you know that? Well, because hopefully you've already done the research. Oh, okay. Let's say you have a slip disc in the back. Is that something that you can do? Well, research it in a medical way that you understand it. You may say, well, I can't do that. It's bad for my back. Based on what? Well, my friend did it and jacked their back up. Okay. Well, there's other things. Your friend jacked up their back, but there's like 100,000 other people who haven't. So you have to keep in mind of that open mind, because if you get tunnel vision on something and then something counteracts it or gives you a different viewpoint, you can literally be like, oh my God, I don't know what to do with this. Oh my God, I really don't know what to do with it. And so that's going to come also into emotional intelligence, Trusting yourself is going to be a part of this. That's correct. Trusting that regardless of the decision that you make, it's going to be the right one for you. Either it's as it works out or the lesson in which you learn. Okay. Now let's go deeper with that. Let's say it's a spiritual type thing, religious type spiritual thing, right? And by FYI, I don't care what you believe in, we're fine. But I'm just giving you alternatives so you can kind of see where dissonance can definitely come into play. Okay. And dissonance can come into play where, let's say you were raised in a certain faith and I don't know, over a period of time, you were just like, oh, I kind of like, well, that's interesting. Like, I kind of like that idea, even though it's different than what I believe in. Well, that can cause some serious dissonance because now you're going into a whole different thing. Now you're like, wait, is this right? Am I allowed to? Yes, you're allowed to. See, the thing is you put these limits upon you because they were put upon us as children. Let's be honest. But you're here now. So when you put these limits upon you, and let's say you were raised, I don't know, Catholic. It's the first thing that jumped in my head. And you think, you know what? My best friend is Buddhist. Okay. And it's not a religion, it's a way of life. And you're like, wow, that really vibes with me. Well, you might not just be like, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do now. I'm going to study it so I can be, no, that's not what you're going to do. Because you're going to think, okay, well, this is what I was told to be right. And right is relative, by the way. Right is relative. If it's something that you vibe with, my God, yes, do that. Please do that. But if it's something that you now go, but this is what I believe, but that's what I love. But I'd like to believe this. Well, I don't know. Is that right? That is dissonance described. That's a full-on blown dissonance moment. But it's deeper than that. Because now let's use this example of being Catholic and coming from the grandparents and all of these things. Now you go into a whole different thing. Now we go from dissonance into people pleasing, into fear of not being liked, into fear of being judged. Because now you're like, oh my God, but what would my family think? Oh my God, no. This has been lineage and lineage for me. So now you've put what you want to do and what you want to study and what you may want to change way in the back burner. Okay, so now this gives you the confirmation bias that you don't have to make the choice, or maybe, you know what, that was just a good idea, but that's not the choice you're going to make. Right? So now you're looking for reasons to support the safest action for you at that time. And we know from all research that cognitive biases simply search out what it is that you're looking for. You'll see this a lot with therapy. People will come into therapy. Ooh, they do not like to have the accountability. Some people, not everybody, by the way. And so they go to somebody else and then they try to have them incorporate some responsibility for themselves. They don't like that either. Now suddenly therapy doesn't work for anybody, right? In their mind. So then you use these big words because what happens is if somebody is going into that specific scenario when they just want to hear that it's kind of like woe is them and like it's everybody else, it's giving them dissonance when given a different viewpoint because it irritates what it is that they believe and what it is that they believe to be true. And then that's where you see people struggle with the fact that emotions and thoughts, your feelings and thoughts, they're not facts, right? They're never going to be facts. And it's hard for people to go, well, but this is how I feel. Again, I've used this example before. You have an anxiety attack. You haven't had one in, say, 6 months. This anxiety attack is the worst that it's ever been. The one before this was the worst that it's ever been. So then if somebody goes, oh, well, I mean, I remember you saying that last time. And now you get defensive because you're like, oh my God, did I say that? Well, wait, now you have to say, oh my God, is that so? So now anytime that you're having to face these choices and challenges, it can cause a high level of dissonance. But that can also cause a lot of problems, and not just in your own life, but in relationships. So you have to be careful on like how strong you are in your belief systems. By all means, do that. Your core values, do that. But just because you have core values doesn't mean that everybody else's view is wrong or that their actions are wrong. It just means that they don't align with you. That causes dissonance because you're like, well, that's wrong. Wait, why? Well, because that's wrong. Yeah, that's why. Because that's not how you do it. Why? Well, that's not how I do it. Oh, okay. Other people have other ways of doing stuff. And then it becomes challenging because you're like, well, if you would just do this, then we would be great. But the person goes against that because they're individuals. And now you're trying to rectify in your mind the action that doesn't fit the words, or the words that don't fit the actions that you want them to be. It isn't just one way, that there is a broader view of this, then it's going to really force you to be present, be open to other opinions and people doing the things they do. Then accept, this is the piece, key piece. Then accept that you don't have to like it. You don't have to agree with it. They do not have to explain it to you. And it is okay to say, this doesn't work for me, and separate and put space there. You may struggle in saying, but if they would just do, they do not have to. And that will cause that sort of like, oh my God, I don't understand why. And if they would just do this, and now you start playing that out. And they could present their facts to you, and that kind of throws you off a little bit. Well, that's for you to process. And the less that you process, the more that you will stay in an imprisoned sort of space in your mind. Okay. And that is something that I want you to get very clear on. Like I said, we're going to go into it on the worksheet, but I really want you to ask yourself these questions, because there's actionable items, right? I like to put action items in there. Like, okay, here's one. Okay. Let me give you a scenario. Okay. You're at work and something happens at work that just kind of like, I don't know, like the way somebody does something, it just kind of like, that's not your belief system on how it's done. Not super problematic, just different. You don't really like it. You're kind of struggling with it. Okay. You go to the higher up, you go to your manager, and you're not being a Karen. You're just like, hey, like, I don't understand it. I feel like this is taking a little long. And so it's hard for me to do my job because this is how they're doing it. And let's say the boss goes, oh yeah, because that's how I told them to do it. This is what the boss says to you. Yeah, that's okay. That's how I told them to do it. Now, immediately in your mind, you go, well, that's kind of stupid. Like, that takes longer. Like, why the hell would you do that? Now you're wrestling with dissonance. That's not, and it's not even, some of it's ego too, but let's say it's written down, right? You're reading a book that says, you're reading a book from 2011. And the book says, do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, F, J, whatever. Okay. You're reading this book. So you're going by the information in this book. Well, the boss got in some new books, didn't give them to you because you've been there. Some new person, they've been there a few months. He's like, oh, okay, here's the book, right? He doesn't even know that there's a bunch of new stuff in it. So the stuff that this guy is now doing at work is actually the way that it's going to improve, even though it may not seem like that to you. It is proven effective. Well, now you're having to grapple with the fact that you've been doing it this way and it seems the most effective. So now it's hard for you to see yourself outside of that box to know that, hey, you know what? Maybe there is an alternative way. So now let's say you go to the boss, like I said, and tell the boss, hey, this is taking too long, yada, yada, yada. And he's like, well, what do you mean? No, this is how it tells you to do it in the book. Maybe he's forgotten to give you this book. And you're like, well, I'm on the 2011. He goes, oh, no big deal. Let me give you this new book, 2024 book. Well, now you start reading it. Are you going to be able to receive that? Or are you going to already be defensive and be like, well, I don't understand it. That's stupid. Like, because then you're in dissonance. Okay. So that's where you're going to have to get yourself to understand that the world does things very differently. It doesn't make it right. Doesn't make it wrong. It just makes it different. People will learn more things. Things will be done differently every year, every 6 months, every whatever it is. And if you're not willing to stay open to it and you feel as though it confuses you, then there's a good chance you're staying in dissonance for a multitude of reasons. Now, don't judge ourselves. We already know that we do not judge ourselves. There's absolutely nothing to judge. There's no reason to judge it. But if you can be aware of it and say, okay, let me take a step back. Let me pull myself back 30,000 feet, 10,000 feet. And let me hear without defense. Active listening is going to be key here. Let me work on what I can do to at least hear it and be open to receive it. So I'm not overreacting and overanalyzing in the situation. And that right there can help you a lot with your dissonance. It really can. And now we're going to talk about some other action items. But don't panic. Just know staying open is going to be very, very helpful.